But I want you to listen to this carefully. The gospel became real to Paul when Jesus became real to Paul. And what that teaches us is this: no teaching or tradition can transfer the gospel to your life, right? Your heritage can't save you. Good Bible understanding or teaching, although it's great, cannot save you. The works of the law can't save you. It's only faith and trust in the gospel of Jesus Christ that can save you. It comes only through an encounter with Jesus. And so even if we are different than Paul, where we say, yeah, the gospel is like the Christianity, I grew up in the church, and so Christianity I would consider to be my heritage. It's not until you have an encounter with Jesus, a personal encounter with him, where you recognize him and your need and your desperation for the amazing grace that we sang about, until you receive him into your life. When you encounter Jesus and he calls you to respond in faith, confession, repentance, baptism, and discipleship, that's when the gospel becomes real. And what Paul's saying in these verses is he experienced and where he received the gospel and the calling on his life is through Jesus. And I really believe this, that the greatest evidence of the authenticity of the gospel for Paul was his life, was his story. And the greatest authentication of the gospel and the power of the gospel in your life is your story. It's what Jesus has done in and through you, where he took a wretch and a sinner and made you new. That's the greatest authentication of the gospel. We can write it like this: the gospel is God's story for your life. If you read through Paul's conversion in Acts chapter 9, you'll find that again that Paul was headed to Damascus to murder Christians when God revealed Jesus and his need for Jesus to Paul. And I think this shows us that sometimes God uses the mess and the messy parts of our lives and the messy parts of our story to reveal his son to us. That it's in our garbage, right? We see this again in the New Testament, the story of the prodigal son, right? It's in the pig slop of life where Jesus is often revealed to us. He started living out his calling to live sent right away, and we have been called to do the same. When the gospel transforms your life and when you have an encounter with Jesus, the answer is to then go start sharing that with everybody. Sharing your story, living sent, as we talk about here often. And I love this because what we're seeing here is that the gospel is God's story for your life, for my life. And that when we not only see and encounter Jesus for ourselves, but we share the gospel with one another, it begins to shape our calling, and it begins to help us cheer one another on in the way that God's called us to serve in the kingdom. The message of Jesus is what unifies us. And when we start pulling away based on human distinction, when we start creating circles around us of only people that look like us and act like us and vote like us and think the same way as us, maybe we need to reevaluate. Because he says the gospel, right? The gospel is not based upon, and the power of the gospel is really on display when every tribe, race, tongue, nation, age, gender, and people group, economic level, preferences, when all of those people come under the power of the gospel together and we look different than one another, that's where the power of the gospel is on display, and that's where unity is on display. And when we pull away from that and just say, I'm just gonna hang with the people that I like or look like me or vote like me or like the same things I like, and I'm not gonna hang out with anybody else, we've limited the power of the gospel. Friends, if you've been set free by the gospel, why are we trying to enslave others with works of righteousness apart from grace that we make as qualifiers and we see people as in or out of God's presence based on those human qualifiers. That our belief in the gospel should cause us to stand up for others, for those who are different than us. Let's be a church family whose love for others travels across our differences. That says your preferences don't have to be the same as my preferences for you to belong here. Because we share the gospel together. Because I've experienced Jesus and you've experienced the presence of Jesus. And we've shared gospel together. And so because of that, even though you've been gifted differently than me, even though you have different ideas than me, even though we disagree on some matters of opinion, even though we disagree on matters of how we think systems should run, even if we have differences in the music that we love or the way that we function in ministry, that's all right. We don't have to divide. We can stand up for one another. And let's expand our circles to people who aren't just like us, except for the gospel that we share. Because, we'll come back to this, because this is the whole point. The gospel is God's story for your life. Because it's when God's story is lived out in our lives. And that's when the power of the gospel is on display.